Okay, so I've already removed the fasteners from this to get the chassis out. A couple other things, not very many of them. There's 4 of them on the bottom. The way this comes apart is kind of nifty. You do need to pull these 2 knobs off. You need to bag those. The clock stays in the cabinet here. You don't need to do anything with the clock. Don't pull the knobs off of it or anything to get the chassis out. 4 screws on the bottom, 4 fasteners on the bottom. Not going to tip it because they're already removed. Pull the volume and tuning knob off the front. Around the back, does not have a safety interlock. Just a strain relief. There's the outlet to plug in the phonograph and the phonograph tone arm input right there. Or you could plug a lamp or something into that. This is an oddball because it has, rather than the typical of that era, antenna loop being wound on the inside of the back panel, a flat Litz wire winding coil. This has a ferrite, presumably ferrite, it could be powdered iron, but I think it's ferrite, lipstick. Magnetic bar with the coils wound in a helix around that. This appears to only have 1 coil from what I recall seeing inside, just 2 connections to it. And there's no trimmer for it. Normally with these radios they had a trimmer capacitor where you could really peak the antenna. But this does not have that. There's a trimmer on the tuning capacitor on the chassis, but that's not something the typical user is going to know what to do to peak the antenna. I guess they figured it wouldn't be necessary. There's the knob to set the clock. Very stiff. I do recall these being somewhat stiff on these radios and clocks. And actually, yes, it's been worked some. It has loosened up a little. So I don't think I'm going to do anything with the clock in this. But 4 screws on the bottom. Take the volume and tune knobs off, and this chassis will pull out from the cabinet. And you have to watch this clock set knob because it seems to get caught between one of the tubes, which has a shield on it, and one of the IF cans, so you just kind of wiggle it out. And the way this works is the clock stays in the cabinet, the speaker stays in the cabinet. Both are easily disconnected. The speaker, on the speaker itself, are 2 terminals that these pull off. Typical speaker sort of connections there. So there's those. That disconnects the speaker, and then there's a 3-wire connector plugged into the chassis, and then the whole thing just comes out. There's a 3-wire connector that goes to the clock. 2 of them power to the clock motor, and the 3rd one out is power to the radio. So the radio's power comes through the switches in the clock, depending on whether it's alarm or you just have it, the switch to manually turn the radio on. So very well done. So you can say this case is in really good condition. I don't know what this is about. Why that's little piece missing here. It almost looks like that was intentionally taken out, broken off. Don't know why. Interestingly, that case bit lines up with this outlet. So maybe they had something plugged in there and interfered with the, who knows. Interesting the way they made this chassis. Kind of unusual. And for one thing, it's a full metal box. This thing is remarkably heavy. Down in here you can see the electrolytic capacitors is 2-section electrolytic. Clearly has the GE logo on it. Very good chance that's original. I can't say for sure. But it does seem to work just fine. You know, 5 tubes, final AF, or yeah, detector and AF shield on it. Now, I said there's a number of fasteners I've already removed from this. Not very many. Let's see. When I got this, like I said, there were a number of things wrong with it. A bunch of these wax capacitors, I didn't even test them. I just shotgunned them and replaced them with modern parts. Just tack the modern parts in. I'll get to lace them properly later once I fix the other problems with it. Some of the wires, these are the speaker leads, were crispy to the point where the insulation was falling off of them and shorting out the whatever. So I had to put some sleeving over these. There were a couple of wires over here I had to replace. Same issue. These old wires, you know, they get crispy and you flex them and suddenly the insulation's falling off of them. Only some wires did that. I'm not sure why that should be. As pointed out earlier, there are only 2 wires going to this antenna, so that's a single coil antenna, not like some others that have multiple taps and things, especially with the ones radios that get shortwave. There's this interesting shield. Normally 3 screws hold this down. I've already removed them, and the one tube shield just kind of sticks in there. Just honeymoon fit into that. So, quite convenient, because when you look down upon these sockets from the top, these tube sockets, every pin is accessible from the top. They call these things cones, solder cones, and the components are on the other side. The leads are popped up into those, and then they're soldered presumably from the top. Not the most rugged sockets I've seen. They're phenolic. I don't much care for phenolic in these wafers, although it does the job. The problem with this is inside of one of these, or both of these cans, I have coils. Basically, there are 4 connections for each underneath inside the chassis that have to be, whatever components are wired, wires are wired to them, have to be removed carefully. And then there are these little spring clips on each side. The whole assembly comes out. And then it's not difficult to get the guts out of these cans. And it's just a rod, a hollow rod with some slugs in it, a couple of coils in there, and this down at the bottom, this sheet to this capacitor that's causing the problem. It's interesting with this, it does not have a dial light. None at all. And it's equipped, or at least on the rectifier tube's filament, they included a tap specifically to allow for a 6-volt dial lamp, little incandescent thing, number 47 or number 40, one of those, to light up the dial. For some reason, with all the other niceties of this, it doesn't include a dial light. That's odd to me. This match pointer for the dial is actually a fluorescent orange plastic. Very unusual to not have a dial-light. It would, if they had a dial-light with a dark purple filter over it, probably would have had this fluorescent, which would have been really nifty. But anyway, so this front behind the dial bezel is part of the base, which is another interesting feature of this. The base is shielded. I mean, the whole thing is shielded. The tube's halfway up because of this piece. All the connections and everything underneath the chassis is shielded. Very, very well done. And I've actually heard that when this model's working right, they are quite sensitive. So with the dial pointer off of there, and then we can separate that from the chassis. Don't need that right now. It's all steel. And what's under here? I mean, without that, it's actually quite a bit less weight. Let me check. Looks good. And not much to see. Your typical All-American 5s, the base of the two coils I need to get at. You can see these little modern plastic capacitors sprinkled in here. Those are ones I put in. There's one, I didn't replace that, it's a disc, but I did check it. That's the oscillator coil, nothing wrong with that, near as I've been able to tell. So yeah, these little orange guys I put in are just tacked in there to see if it worked. The electrolytic cap, doggone if that does not look like the original. It's hard to know. So 16 to 20 microfarad. Alumalytic capacitor. Service designed alumalytic capacitor. 220 microfarads up to 150 volts, which in this radio it probably sees about 130 volts. And so, but that seems to be working. I'll look at it more since I'm into it now anyway, and maybe do a little bit cleaning. There's one of these, I call these Z-Packs. The circuitry in these radios was so similar from one to the next. They often, the common network of resistors and capacitors, rather than use separate discrete components for every build, they had made these packages of these networks. I hate those things. Not that they're a big source of grief, but unless you have a schematic, you cannot know what's going on in there. Where's the resistor, where's the capacitor? There are places to get information on these things, but they, not always. So, I hate those things. I'd much rather have discrete components. You look at these capacitors, these individual resistors and things, they're marked right on them what they are. And if not, it's the single component. You can look where it is in the circuit and pretty much figure out, based on other radios you've seen, what the value should be. So that's where we are. Hey, there's not a lot to this radio at all. Simple AM or alarm clock radio. And I'm almost certain there are some checks I'm going to do to try and figure out which one of these coil or these transformers is needs that capacitor in there removed, replaced. There are ways to do that, but it's not going to make a whole lot of sense if I try to do it, video it. Anyway, but that's where it is. So we'll get her done when we're done.